Hi, this is Clarence Moye with Awards Daily here with Julian Breece, the co-screenwriter of Netflix's upcoming Rustin, which tackles the life of the how would you describe Bayard Rustin, the impactful change-making agent, change agent, and a revolutionary? Would you use those words?
Yeah, I would call him a troublemaker for good.
There
He
you
was
go. Good trouble.
yeah, he was a genius strategist who, he worked in the anti-war movement and the Black Freedom movement really from the beginning of the civil rights movement as we know it. So I mean, he kind of helped write the blueprint for the civil rights movement, and then his biggest accomplishment was the March on Washington, which the movie set around.
Yeah, which is, it's sad that I have to say this, but it's not a story that I was familiar with. I certainly knew the March on Washington existed, but his participation in it has not been quite as public as perhaps it should, right? So it was a breath of fresh air. The film is detailing so much of that time and his struggles, personal and professional, within that period. So I really appreciated it for that. What was it that first attracted you to tell this story of Bayard Rustin?
Well, I mean, my journey with with Bayard started when I was in high school, and not because I learned about him in high school, because he did not exist in any of those textbooks, and actually just learned about him on the internet. I was, coming of age and coming to terms with my own sexuality, that I was gay, and I'm a millennial, and that's how we found out about things that we're not supposed to know about. Was just doing an internet search, and he popped up, and I was just shocked that there was this tall, striking, just powerful looking black gay man that was in rooms with Martin Luther King, and not just in rooms with him, but advising him. I mean, we're talking about the most um, famous, iconic religious figures in modern history. Martin Luther King was being mentored by a gay man. So, I mean, that was really moving to me to know that. I think it was him and, James Baldwin. Those were kind of the two men that I could look up to as, black gay role models, because I just didn't have that, in my environment. So I learned more about Bayard in college, just, really delving in deeply to just his personal story and also his work as an organizer. I mean, he dedicated his life to um, really to the liberation of all people, right? Which is like a very like broad, ambitious thing to go after, but he absolutely meant that. Like that's what he wanted, and his career and what he was able to achieve is a testament to that. Unfortunately, because he was gay, those accomplishments and just how impactful he was, not just to the civil rights movement, but to, as a result of what he did with the Black Freedom Movement, to just about every like subsequent liberation movements in this country and around the world, took that same model. So, yeah, it's an important guy.
Absolutely. And it's so compelling to see the start of sort of this community organization that we have become so familiar with, at least certainly within the last 20 years. Community organization that led to the election of Barack Obama is one of them.
Yeah.
It's so interesting to see the grassroots of that, as you described, the initiation of that, the pulling it and really making change through
Yes.
people's power. That's a really powerful message of this film. As I look at the film, it does what so many great biopics do, which is to tell you who this person is, but not do, cradle to grave kind of biopic tradition sort of, stereotypes. It's focusing
Yeah.
on this very specific couple of years that, not only was dramatically impacted the shape of the United States, but also dramatically impacted him as a person. Was that always the intent, to focus on Bayard as his through his involvement with the march?
Absolutely. I think that, I mean, there's a place for cradle to grave biopics.
Mhm.
I tend to prefer, biopics that really take, if we're doing a biopic about, a great person, just taking a moment from their life, that the moment that made them great, and telling their life story through that moment. And for Bayard, very early on, I knew that you know telling Bayard's story through the march would be the strongest way to do it for a number of reasons. Mainly because it was such a big moment in American history, that, I mean, we're talking about 8 weeks. He built the largest mass demonstration in American history. That's the time that he had to do it. But also, it was a convergence of a lot of the important people from his life and career. King, A. Philip Randolph, people who were really all coming together. So it was like his work in the civil rights movement was, all of that was coming together with the march, all of the harmony and the friction, that he felt. So, yeah, I mean, it was just those were the things that kind of immediately came to me. Finding his personal story was a little bit more difficult. Yeah, that was the challenge.
Yeah, so you talked about discovering who he was through internet researching, through Google, things like that, as you know, as a millennial would. Um, what was most valuable to you when you started this research process to pen the script?
I would say that, there were, biographies that had started to come out, that were helpful, just to get, and reading Bayard speeches were helpful. There's no question that the most important part, of the storytelling for me, of the research process to getting to the story for me, was one-on-one interviews, with people who knew Bayard and worked with him, including his partner, Walter Nagel, his life partner, who they were not together while Bayard was working, in the civil rights movement. They weren't together until over a decade later. But a lot of people, everybody loved Bayard. Everyone you talk to says Bayard is the most generous person you know. He's kind, he's gentle. Um, he lives all of the ideals that he espouses, which is sometimes not what you can say about a lot of our public figures and leaders. They said that he lived it. At the same time, he was extremely private. So the people who loved him worried about him because they didn't know what he was really struggling with privately. He didn't share those things. So, those are the things that you could only really find out from someone like, his partner, Walter Nagel, to know, who Bayard is when he's not trying to be strong for everyone else.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, so those, because I mean, when you're doing a biographical film, you don't know. You're not in the rooms with these people, especially, they've passed on, there's no one to tell you how things went down. So being able to, and you don't always get this, but being able to get to know, get to feel the essence of a person so that you can start to, you know, um, inhabit that person, as you're never going to be able to do it like perfectly, but as accurately and as, um, and as with as much integrity as you can as a writer. I mean, that's really important to me. And I felt like I got there with Bayard's character.
Roman Domingo seems to live and breathe Bayard
Whew,
Rustin. I mean,
yes.
it's almost. I watched the film and I was just so blown away by his tremendous performance. It's almost as if the film itself just can't seem to. It wants to contain that force of nature that he just seems to be pulling that from some location, someplace, some
Yeah.
inspiration. It's like he's channeling the spirit of Bayard Rustin. It's really amazing. What was your working relationship like with him as he was working through the script and discovering, who this character was and how he was going to portray him?
It's actually like Coleman and I only met recently.
Oh wow.
Yeah, before that, we had texted, and he read. I started working on the film and the screenplay in 2013. So I would say around, it was set up somewhere else. There was a director attached. It looked like it was going to go, and then as movies happen, things fall apart. And actually, Coleman at the time was someone had brought the script to him, and he loved it. Like he was like, "I'm the only person who can play um, this role." And so that was around 2000. I want to say 16 or 17 at that point. And, again, it moves the life of a film from development to production is, can be quite an odyssey. And honestly, it just so happened that once it was taken to Netflix and higher ground, Coleman was still in love with this script. And um, there couldn't be any other choice than him to play this role. And, he, like you said, he had also just this deep respect and, love. I mean, what I can say about that connects Coleman, George, and I, Bayard's our hero. We all feel like a deep sense of connection to him, and that the work that we did on the project is an active service. So Coleman did this, he did the same kind of in-depth research, that, George and I did. And, but there's just the X factor. The way that he was able to channel him is just something that, only the most, um, our most special actors have. And I mean, it made me emotional to see him perform, and then to let him know how much I loved his performance.
What was it like when you saw the film for the very first time?
Extremely emotional, for multiple reasons. It's just, this was the first script that I wrote for a studio. So it was my first professional feature writing job. And, and after that, I had a career after that. But in the beginning, I mean, this project meant so much to me. Like I lived and breathed the project. I was temping at the time, making, I don't know, maybe like 11 or $12 an hour. And when I got this job, I took the savings that I had and moved to New York to do the interviews and to do the research, because that I was just like, that's what you have to do, right? You have to like move to like the place, which, you don't have to do, but I felt like I had to. And so seeing the film actually get made, not just 10 years later, but the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington, and 10 years after Barack Obama gave Bayard the Medal of Freedom Award. It just felt like so much had aligned. It was from that first scene in the film, with, the Ruby Bridges scene, that George has, the opening and the injustice that's happening there. I was a mess from the beginning, and emotional throughout. I mean, he did such a beautiful job. And yeah, it was embarrassing. I was crying through the whole thing. Luckily, there are other people crying too, so I didn't feel like alone. But it was felt like a full circle moment for me, and for Bayard, it just meant everything, because now people will know who my hero is, and that young gay Black boys will be able to know who he is and what they're capable of. Seeing that strength, the dignity, the he fought for his truth. I mean, this is a man who was openly gay in the 30s, 50s, and 60s.
Right.
It's incredible.
Absolutely. Well, I think those tears were definitely earned for sure. You should not
Thank
be
you.
embarrassed about those.
Thank you so much.
You were talking about Dr. Martin Luther King earlier. One thing that I was really fascinated by was, again, a piece of history that we are not taught, that I was not aware of, but there were whisper campaigns about the relationship between Dr. King and Bayard Rustin. What was your intent through the screenplay to communicate regarding that working relationship between those two men?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a people don't realize that the black community, prior to civil rights, the civil rights movement. So, in the 20s, 30s, was rather accepting of sexual variance and gender variance. For us, it was, we embrace all of us because we're all like, this is the same fight we're all fighting. So, when Bayard, he was coming up in the 30s, I'm not going to say there was like a gay community, but like there was acceptance. His grandmother accepted him. Things really changed for the Black community when the fight for equality and the civil rights movement, as we know it, started to gain momentum because there were certain mainstream norms or white patriarchal norms that Black people had to take on in order to prove that we were worthy of equality in this country. And we didn't have to just prove that we could follow them, but even exceed them. And obviously, the aggressive homophobia in this country and was a part of that. And so within the movement, you have these men like Martin Luther King, like Roy Wilkins, who's portrayed by Glenn Turman in the film, who have the highest regard for Bayard, respect him, friends with him, but they all had the same goal, including Bayard, to push the movement forward. And within that, there was just no place for him. I think it's this idea of like, if you can't keep it a secret, then we have to make you a secret. You got to, you have to go. And so what was important for me to show is the struggle that not just Bayard was having, but like King. I mean, Bayard meant so much to him. But, there were the whisper campaigns that were made to be divisive. For multiple reasons. There were people that just did not like how influential Bayard was when it came to King, and that goes even deeper with things that we can't. You only have 90 minutes, right? You only to get into, but I had to touch on that, and I think that it was important to show how Black men Black gay men and Black gay men not just can like interact and come together, but also have in the past. Like that is who we were. There are things that we sacrificed of ourselves, in order to integrate into this country.
It's so important too, the way that the film shows how that question of sexuality or his personal life becomes such a distraction, and it's intended to be that way. That is, the people intend to put that up as a distraction to say, let's not focus on this or that. Let's not focus on advancement. Let's focus on his personal life. And, it had nothing to do with the cause, but that it became an unfortunate mechanism for division within the movement. And it's so important the way that is portrayed within the screenplay. Now, I know there's no such thing as an easy way to write a screenplay. That's the whole process is very challenging. As you've mentioned, it took, several years to get this to a filmable state. But what was a scene within the film that was particularly challenging for you to create, to write?
I would say that there were challenging scenes that were fun, like the scene where Bayard is at the Roosevelt Hotel when the Big Six at the time were basically deciding, if he was in or out. And I loved writing that scene because just the idea that Bayard is sitting there showing his strategy brain, he's scripting out what's going on, just knowing these men, he's scripting out how things are going to go. And, he's already strategized on how to win in that room. So, I mean, that was just I would say the choreography of it was challenging. The most challenging for me to write was probably the scenes with Bayard and the leadership at the end of the film. It was just emotional. Um, and I think a lot of queer people can relate to those moments of having to feel like you have to plead for acceptance, or, from people who you respect, or you feel disappointed by them. And knowing who Bayard was and knowing what his approach would be, um, and what King's interactions would be, it was a real dance of like how that conversation would happen, how that emotional um, moment would happen between mentor and mentee, the disappointment that Bayard felt, but also I felt like it, and it was this moment of, here, King, is your final test to greatness. And I mean, it makes me a little emotional even thinking about it now, because that's how much Bayard loved him, and that's how much King loved him. So it was like the arc of King in this was really important to be told as well, because that was a moment for him there where he became the leader that we know him as, the leader who would take risks. Um, when he supported Bayard, there was a risk, but he did it. That was his test. And then he got up on that stage and gave one of the most famous speeches of all time. So that was challenging to get what I felt would be right. And yeah.
So you have this finished product here. Obviously an emotional connection. You have an emotional connection to it. It's been produced by executive produced by Higher Ground, which is Barack Obama and Michelle Obama, which you can't get much better than that.
Yes.
When people see this and it opens in select theaters on November 3rd, and it's everywhere on Netflix on the 17th. When people see this, what do you hope they take away from this story?
I think that, like, there are two things. I think that one of the biggest things is, what if we did not have Bayard Rustin? What if he had been pushed out? What if he hadn't fought to come back? Mm-hmm. That's how much he cared about equal rights and the equality of all human beings, that he fought to come back into a movement that had pushed him out. The outsiders, the freaks, the people who we've outcast for a lot of times really ridiculous reasons. Think about what we're missing out on. Even with the way that you mentioned, the way that we look into people's private lives, in order to undercut the work that they're doing. It's just kind of like, it's unfortunate when that happens. So just the idea of, like, really thinking about what we're shooting ourselves in the foot by pushing some people out, but then also just to really stand up and take risks. I mean, Bayard Rustin, he felt like any kind of truncation or any kind of attack on the truth was violence. Mm-hmm. He lived that. For him, like, he never came out. He was just like, this is my truth. If I can't stand in my full truth, then I don't believe in the truth. And, I think that we're in a really divisive time, in this country and the world, where we have a lot of misinformation being spread on purpose. We have a lot of, lies, that we're telling each other in order to ramp up whatever agendas we have. And the people who stand for truth need to stand up. They need to take the risk and push back. And we see a lot of our leaders cowering from that. And, I think it's going to take not just our leaders, but it's going to take people to really stand tall. And I hope that people see that in Bayard. I really hope people are inspired by that part of Bayard. I hope he inspires them like he inspired the young people who worked with him in the movement.
Beautifully said. Julian, I think those are all the questions I have for you today. Thank you so much for this film.
Thank you, Clarence.
it is an important piece, but most importantly, it is incredibly entertaining and very well done. So thank you for your work on this and in illuminating this part of history that many of us never knew anything about. So
Thank you. That means a lot to me. Thank you so much.
all right, take care.
All right. Take care, Clarence. Bye.
Bye bye.